Water Studio would be able to give us a picture of what it could look like in the future, and I think he definitely succeeded there. Who thinks that that some of these ideas look like interesting places to spend time in the future? Anybody? It's kind of cool, right? And the number of times you flipped the idea on its head over and over and over again and showed new opportunities that could be done there is really interesting, and clearly a really interesting way for the industry that's been built around the energy space offshore to find new opportunity, which leads us to Jason Bain here from First Ocean. You've worked in subsea construction and in the energy space for quite a long time.
Too long.
Too long, right? We're interested to hear from you about what it takes to be an entrepreneur in this space. I've got a mic right here. The floor is yours.
That is an extremely difficult presentation to follow.
Isn't it?
Super cool. Is he crazy? Is it possible? Is it too radical? Is it actually feasible? Is it actually doable? What I'd like to speak about today is what it takes to execute radical ocean tech projects in the real world. As an introduction, First Ocean is a company which specializes in the execution of marine operations. Humbly speaking, we're a group of hotshots that solve impossible problems. Absolutely awesome offshore. We specialize in able to take offshore construction and actually making it happen. CoreMarine, these are the rock stars in heavy engineering who specialize in finding clever, smart solutions within the ocean space. So whether it's semi-subs, spars, floating wind, even America's Cup sailboats, this is CoreMarine. To realize the realization of radical ocean tech projects, it really takes, or we have experienced, takes three things. It takes three things, and we will go a few examples of what we're actually trying to state here. One, it takes a belief. It takes a belief in the project, whether it's by a person, by a company, by a country, but someone has to believe in that project, put their money there, and go for it. It then takes a team. We have to have the right team that's able to realize the solution. The people that are able to see outside the box and see the solution. And the third is technology. And actually it's really simple. It's actually just the use of proven technology and innovating on top of it. I got a phone call from CoreMarine. They're going, hey, we got a project, is it possible you guys can help us out on? Well, when CoreMarine calls, you always say yes. It doesn't matter, because whatever project they're working on, it is cool. You say yes. Yeah, just out of curiosity, what's the project? Oh, we're going to install an underwater restaurant. Are you serious? Holy smokes. Well, where's this at? You're thinking about, okay, where in the world is this going to be at? No, it's actually in southern Norway. Okay. Well, for CoreMarine, it was like, okay, yes, you're started, but yeah, we have a few issues here. Basically, the restaurant, the way it's been designed, is basically uninstallable. It can't be lifted, and it doesn't float. Or if it does float, it flips over. Okay, well, how much time do we have until this thing's going in the water? Roughly about 6 months. CoreMarine was able to use very simple, proven technology, do simple modifications, do a combination of being able to find a way to actually lift it and float it at the same time to sit on the seabed. For First Ocean, this project was a walk on water, a walk in the park. For us, all we were focused on is looking at the safety aspects for personnel, the order of operations, and having contingency plans, backup plans if things were in haywire. Absolutely awesome project. But tying this together, this was because one guy, it was actually two guys actually, but one guy with a crazy idea that believed in the project and put money behind it. It was a team assembled that was able to think outside the box and deliver to cost-effective levels. And once again, I forgot to mention that the restaurant, when CoreMarine, they had a problem. It couldn't be lifted, it couldn't float, and they had no money. Quite interesting challenge to tackle. And this project also, used proven technology in alternative forms. Nothing was new on the job. It was just used in a different way. So let's tie this into the sea tree from Cohen. Really cool. Is it too radical? Is it possible? Well, it's actually quite fascinating because the foundation of this is nothing new. We're already doing this in semi-subs and platforms today. No problem for the structure, the underwater structure to work. Simple, not going into too much detail now, but for simplicity, to be able to introduce ballast tanks into it. Ballasting to be able to handle float control during the construction of it and also during the operation of it. We've just recently had a floating golf course start sinking. So the golf course, they had to go out and start cutting the trees down and taking vegetation off to get the city to float again. These are the simple ways of being able to put into a structure like this as the structure is growing to be able to ballast and keep having flow control. To be able to moor it up, also very simple, whether you do a spread moored system or whether you do a turret moored system, to be able to handle weather vaning, not a problem. There's nothing new to make that project happen. We are already doing extremely cool things already in the industry. Floating wind is already here. A lot of designs are behind it. And to give an example, the size of this is absolutely immense. It is a huge size project. When looking at the sea tree, the applications, the design principles behind this can be implied 100%. Because the difficulty with floating wind is that these are extremely complex structures to design, both from an aerodynamic point of view and a hydrodynamic point of view in the ocean space. This is one of the benefits that CoreMarine has had with their Formula One style engineering, to be able to apply what they have been doing in the offshore wind industry in the design of these, to be able to take that application and apply directly to what Cohen is trying to produce in the sea tree. So from the foundation, sorted, topside, sorted, it can be done. We have the proven technology, we have the right team to execute. We're now inviting the person, company, or country with the belief to do it with us, with the belief to do it together with us. How much time do I have? Because we're running really late. All right, I skipped this one. I got a real cool one. The point here was that us offshore, for some reason, I've been told a lot, it's impossible. What you're doing is impossible. The French, working on West African projects was the absolute best, because with the French accent on speaking English, you always hear that, Jason, this is impossible, what are you doing, you're crazy. Now, the reason that most of the heavy lift or the critical projects, the pictures are taken at nighttime, is because we have to wait till they go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, rigging and slinging, crane in the air, lift done. The next morning, it happens every single time. They wake up in the morning, oh, we're losing so much money, what are you guys doing? This is impossible. It's like, man, guy, the job's done. Oh, that's impossible. How did you do it? The point here was that on a particular project, same issue, solution was not readily available on hand, how to think outside the box. It was just an example of a project. Yes, we had a team, use proven technology, find an innovative solution. Today, that picture, except without me standing in it, is actually at the entrance of the Bechtel Engineering in Houston, in the headquarters. And we asked, why do you have this project, of all the cool projects you guys have done, why is this actually in the headquarters in the entrance? He goes, it was the first project that we've ever seen that was so far outside the box for how to install something, and you only use simple, proven technology in a different way. It was a reminder for them to how they could approach other projects. So today, CoreMarine, First Ocean, we are installing the hot farm for Norlox offshore. Another really cool project, 400 plus meters long vessel sitting offshore Lofoten. For us, and as a non-oil and gas project, cost is an issue, keeping cost levels down. We were able to take non-oil and gas regulations, but using the standards, best in practice standards, both the safety and also integrity of the permanent equipment, to be able to apply it to, yes, the mooring systems, the power umbilical, the actual float off and the hookup. So it was to say that, yes, Here we had the country of Norway, not a person or a company, but it was actually the country of Norway who voted and said we want that design to be approved to go offshore, which allowed Norlocks to enable it. We put together a team and just using simple, proven technology to execute a quite wild project. So yes, as the red thread coming together, belief, team, technology, and I'd like to invite Cone back up on to the green with me here. We are already doing extremely complex projects offshore. Åsta Hansing is awesome, very complex. We'd like to introduce now where First Ocean, CoreMarine, and Water Studios are going in partnership together, and this is what we're going to build. The question is, who wants to join us?
It's for us a very happy day. We want to announce the partnership here together on this moment because we're very happy for Equinor to bring us together because that also came out of this half-year cooperation. And having the goal to really upgrade cities worldwide, you have to go in the next step. Looking back 100 years ago, there was no high-rise buildings. Everything was just horizontal. And then there was one man who had a very nice technology for elevators, and we got a vertical city. Today, we have the floating structures. We can go over the water, but with engineers like those, we can really the next step. We can also go into the water. With this will be the possibility to make upside down towers. So think about Monaco, for instance. Monaco, there is really a need for space, but people living next to the waterfront, they don't want to have any buildings in front of them. The water is 50 meters deep. So having there this kind of sea scrapers, buildings that for the first 6-7 layers we have hotel rooms in the water, and for the rest it's much more like an observatory or a location where you can explore the oceans with like custodas. That gives a possibility. It's not that this building is the only building we want to build, but it shows that if you bring crazy architects and the right engineers together, there's a whole new world to explore. And it will go in small steps. This is not the first things we will see, but it gives us the ability to make our cities better. So I'm very happy with the partnership, and thanks Equinor for making this possible.
Thanks so much. Cool, thank you, Jason. All right, incredible possibilities, technical solutions, and application scenarios for what could be done. I thought initially we were talking about on the surface, but we're apparently talking about below the surface also, which is excellent. Jason from CoreMarine also, what's possible today, how what you've been doing for years in a lot of offshore applications solves perhaps some of the problems that we've seen up here that we thought might be trickiest. We already have a lot of that capability. What we'd like to do now is focus a bit on some of the blockers. What's making it hard for us to realize the visions that we saw and to employ the capabilities that we already have? We have a couple of folks with us here. David's in the back here. He's going to try to make a group out of half of the folks that are sitting here. And Stefan, well, that's just perfect, Stefan. Stefan's going to try to do the same with the other half that's sitting here. And then we've got this crew here that's sort of sitting in the living room over here. Don't go near that speaker. Margaret, do you want to hang out with this group? We've got a few questions that we'd like you to explore in those groups, and then we'd like to hear about them, hear about what you come up with. The first of these is about city planning. How can we convince city planners to zone for areas like this? This is a demand creation question. So the visions are here, a lot of the capabilities exist already. How can we create a demand for these solutions that allows all of the rest of us working in the industry to participate in doing the projects and providing the solutions? So if you could have a conversation in this group, you guys might need to group a little bit closer together and maybe sort of divide and group around the folks leading the discussion. We'd love to help have your help in answering that question. Give you several minutes and then come back with another. Everybody's a rock star, oh my gosh.
I don't think we solved it. No.
Share a thought that came up in the discussion of this team?
I think so.
Yeah. We discussed that maybe it could be useful to sort of zoom out a little bit and scale it up and then describe what benefits will this floating city give to the global good. What will the floats that the onshore city isn't addressing today?
Right.
What square meter usage will it generate for the onshore land? And what value and the benefits of the value creation on land versus offshore. So it has to do with the balance between the onshore and the offshore and the floating city, and what will the floating city do that the onshore city aren't able to provide.
Right, wonderful. Is that they will be pushed from the center and then be riding buses or walking for many hours to get to their place of work. So one of them is, if the city planning is done correctly, as gentrification happens and people get pushed further from the centers, you could provide opportunities for them to continue to live close, rather than being pushed 2 and 3 and 4 hours commuting time out from where their places of work. This is one example. But there's probably 5 or 10 more pieces of answer to that question. So that's definitely a good one to articulate for planners, so that they can answer that. How about from this group? Stefan's going to do it.
I'm not going to do it. I would just want to inform everyone here that in our group we didn't really solve the problem, but we have an amazing participation because we have one person who's actually developing floating student housing and another person who's partially developing a floating city. And so I guess we agreed that the city planning is on paper and sometimes in statements very much supported from politicians, but when it gets to it, when it gets to an application, we get into trouble. So I would like both of you to very briefly explain what you're doing and I guess the troubles you see. And if you came up with a solution in the interim minutes here,
If the world was so easy to solve all the problems, I partly agree that we didn't come up with any big ideas or solutions, but if we put it into practice, then maybe we find out something on the way, and maybe it's also an international perspective into it. So the legislation and the law and the regulations about the world maybe should be lifted a little bit higher up than from the municipalities or the countries actually. So maybe start with that.
Yeah, my name is Rasmus. I'm from Urban Rigger. We produce floating student housing in containers. We have a project in Copenhagen right now with 6 riggers. It's 72 apartments for students. And we have another project in Sweden, in Gothenburg, with 24 riggers. And what we've experienced is that the politicians are very keen and really appreciate the idea, the whole sustainability and the thought. But when it comes to the application process, it is very, very difficult because the rules are not meant to living on the water in Denmark, unfortunately. So we don't have the same history and experience as my colleague here in the Netherlands, unfortunately. So we didn't come up with any solutions yet. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. But it sounds like you came up with a couple specific things that need to be addressed. So that's absolutely interesting. What about in this group here, Margaret?
Thanks, Rick. Much more optimistic over here. I'm going to hand over to our colleague Etienne, who's got some experience of building or designing floating things here in Norway, in Oslo.
Thank you. So my experience is about a very small grassroots project of a floating garden in Oslo, and it comes from the same group of people who worked with the floating sauna in Oslo. And our experience is that the way we've been able to finance the project is to work with, started with small funding applications from given away by the municipality. And what we found out is that to work with city planners, you have to help them fulfill their mandate. So we have a very human-centered approach to this technological discussion. And we are thinking in terms of neighborhoods, of community, in terms of quality of life. We're thinking about what are people doing here, what makes them happy, what activities help them to create a really good quality of life. And so what we focused on is to build projects that are participatory, that are open for all types of demographics, and create activities that strengthen the existing tissue of social activities in a neighborhood. And for instance, gardening. We also worked on basically helping the city planners document that their work is going towards making the city a more green city with concrete activities that they can show. And you see that with the floating sauna, it's become a very popular icon. And it started as a floating project because the people who started the project knew it would be very difficult to get an authorization to be somewhere. So they made it floating from the start so that they could move easily whenever they would be thrown away from where they were. And that's what happened all the time until they could document that they had such a big community of followers and that it started to generate a lot of media and attraction in the international media. So that eventually the municipality created a floating pontoon right in front of the opera where you could park legally 4 of these floating structures. So to summarize, I would really recommend a human-centered approach and think about how to help the city planners do the job. Thank you.
Are you the Etienne used to be with DNV?
Yes.
Oh, nice to meet you. For many years, cool. So we'd like to give you another question now to work through, if that's okay. And this one gets a little bit back to your question. What are we trying to solve? And it has to do with climate adaptation, right? I'm trying to remember the numbers exactly, but if we look at coastal Bangladesh, where there's also a lot of border tension between Bangladesh and India, I think there are more than 100 million people who are potentially stressed by sea level rise and might be pushed off of the places where they live today. So the question is, how do we position floating cities as an option for government response to climate change? Go ahead.
If you're going to build more floating constructions there, you also need to have a new infrastructure of energy supply. You need to figure out how you will deliver power to those structures, and also how you will have sustainable operations in the harbors and in the ports by the ships that will come in. So what we in Wärtsilä bring into this picture is that we work with alternative of energy supplies to ship and zero emission shipping, so that you can every ship that comes in to a city should be zero emission. And of course you then need to talk and to work with the harbor authorities and the city authorities to make that infrastructure. And also you can have structures offshore, you can have them close to shore, but you still need to take care of that change of energy and change of ships that will come in and out, and make sure that they are zero emission. And also there are boats in the cities, on the rivers. If you look at New York and if you look at London, you will have those shuttle boats going there, and also you can do a lot with that energy change and make sure that they are zero emission in the future. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. And how about in the middle here? Sean? Hi, Sean.
I'm being forced to actually take the mic. It's under duress. No, what we started off with was, sort of, as you know, we've got two people here who are actually working in this already.
Yep.
And they're definitely playing the climate angle.
Yeah.
And a lot of the talk is around sort of getting the emotional side of it.
Yeah.
But then we turned the discussion more around to the commercial aspect, that the climate adaptation solution for floating city is actually going to be the most viable from a commercial point of view.
Right.
Sort of one of the examples was purchasing the land and building up and trying to expand the city in the current way.
Yeah.
That is going to be quite capital intensive.
Yeah.
Whereas building on the water isn't that much more expensive than building a physical structure. But if you have the marine side of it as well, the actual acquisition of that water space can be shown to be less costly.
Right.
So the overall system can be actually the more economical solution for that climate adaptation.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that. Very interesting. And then finally, the group here that.
Yeah, I think there were two strands here, one of which was around climate adaptation, and then the other was around not making the problem any worse than it already is. I wonder, Avon, do you want to say something about rules?
The benefit of something not existing yet is that you can build it the way to your imagination. Also in regards to the rules, so if I'm the politician and I want to do this, then I can say in order for you to be allowed to build this, you need to build it environmentally friendly. And if you don't, then you're not allowed to build it at all. So that's a major benefit. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Margaret, I wonder if you want to come back up. I apologize that it's an abrupt transition. The next question, which I think comes off of what Margaret was just talking about rather well, is around how we can use Norway, what's happening in the offshore space, and also some of what we see around the flexibility in planning in our coastal cities, how we can use that as a lab for some of the solutions that we might then employ elsewhere in the world. So I'll let you have a crack at that question in your group. How can Norway be a lab for this?
We could all collaborate on this, and could we pilot it in Norway because we're in Norway?
Standardization maybe could be an interesting word there. Pretty delighted to hear that, perhaps you two guys, but it's all about standardization also in the construction industry, because you can't do everything from, the architects, they always want to create something unique, but that's ending. It's not ending, but you have to also have something which is standardized. Maybe floating constructions which we can build on.
Yeah. But I think there's a timing issue. I think the time is with us. I think when we have more projects on the water, people will start thinking this is normal. It's not crazy to live on water. And I think the politician, everybody, also the investors will think, well, this might work. And right now, when I talk to investors, if they want to invest, have a million questions and they're very, very skeptical. Obviously, I can always throw the CSR, sustainability, student housing, and so on, and that works. But then it's because of that. It's not because they think, oh, this is actually going to be a good investment. It's because they want to be a part of the project, be associated with a rock star architect and so on. That's the reason.
Standardization is really important.
I think that
I did architecture. Yes, that is just ego is building a nice thing. But I also studied industrial design. That's what I like even more, because seeing these things as products, how can you make more efficient? How can you build 1,000, 2,000, 10,000?
But that's basically what we're trying, right? We're making one rigger and can connect, and you can basically like Lego.
And water gives you that opportunity. It's so easier to build here, bring over water, connect, assemble, disconnect, change, add. So I see a future for prefab even more water than land.
This will require a lot of new solutions, innovation, and innovation should be based on a level of standardization. And then you innovate on top of that and feed it back into new standards, development of standards. So Building Smart has a innovation program called Open Lab, actually going on the other side of this Open Lab hackathon, where the initiative is to the case for that is the bridge over Bjørnafjorden, ferry-free E39, cutting the travel time in half between Stavanger and Bergen.
It's submerged construction.
It was actually a floating
The
bridge.
floating bridge, actually. So based on open standards for information sharing, we are now 60 persons are hacking ideation of new solutions. How can we create solutions for this digital twin of this bridge to create smart societies? So in that way, in innovating in that way and bringing people together on a neutral arena like Standards Norway or Building Smart, you can come up with many new ideas based on standards.
I should say this is very similar to what we did with Equinor, with what we came up with as the fruit idea of this last workshop was the standardized modular floating block. So originally called float block, but then it should have smart sensor and it was called smart float at the end. And the pitch was quite strong, I think, but the lacking component for Equinor's upper management to invest in it, I think, is they're not sure or completely convinced that there is a market. Like there are customers who would be standing there on the other side willing to buy. So we had a few examples, but I think to build that case, it's kind of a circular argument because the customer is not there until the solution seems viable, but the solution won't be there until the customer is there. So we need to somehow attack it. Yeah.
But I think what we've got, sort of literally as we've already said, sitting around the table, is you have the team and the knowledge here in Norway. You have the willingness. You're already working there. As you say, it's finding that customer, but it's one that we still struggle with. Sort of with a lot of the stuff we're doing, like we're talking about the restaurant's great. It's a one-off. What's next with that kind of technology and development is finding out what the use case is and what that customer. And I think getting pilots going with that standardized solution there that brings that cost right down, that you can plug and play and chop around and move around and actually touch and feel that solution would be. And Norway is perfect for it because you have the whole industry built around building on water. You can do it and you can change things out week in, week out. It's just a case of when are we doing it?
Yeah.
But I think people or companies or whoever need to see the business opportunity for that. Okay? So having these kind of sessions, standardizing, I think is important so people can access it, the company can access it, so it doesn't become a mystery.
Yeah.
People have to see that there's a business opportunity.
I think if we will see that, especially after that Singapore and so the housing prices in Singapore is amazing. So there will be the same in Oslo because Oslo is also limited by the hills around us. So at some point it might go into the water.
The biggest problem is it's never one company. It's not one developer who can change it. We did a project in Holland for a polder, a dry zone which you want to bring water in, like a storage zone. And so there was the municipality, it was the province, it was the government, it was developers, and we should do there 8,000 houses, of which almost half would be floating. And then we stepped in, worked on it for 4 or 5 years, and in that moment the market became bad, and they changed into just reclamation, put land on it, and built on which is cheaper and easier. So you have to, you can have some developers who want to do very innovative things, but you have a trusty partner in a government municipality who wants to stick with you during the whole process and not sneak out all the times that things are getting more difficult. Because these processes, certainly we do thousands of houses, it's taking you years, and so you have to have a very stable environment condition to make this into a success.
If you just have a little mind shift among people, which says that it's much more cheap to buy land on sea because it's already there, and if the foundation cost is relatively small, then why not?
Yeah.
You have just to see the figures and say that this is a big business for everyone.
Because building a water is more than only the price of the house, it is the total cost of development, and that's land and water.
What we do here is that we have the knowledge of it.
But then you have to explain them that you can buy the plot, you can lease the water, or you can lease it. In Maldives we have these big lagoons which we lease for 100 years. 100 years, that's enough. So you get it fixed.
What was the Danish or Copenhagen municipality or whatever motivation to only give you a 10-year lease?
Uncertainty?
Yeah, well, it's just the way it is. They're not used to it. And I mean, we got 10 years. I know many owners of large households. They have 3 months. They have been there forever. But their termination notice period.
You have to reapply.
Go down to the bank and ask for a loan on that. That's impossible. So for us, it was it's difficult to complain, but in terms of finance, it's impossible for 10 years because it is a building and it will last for. I mean, our concrete foundation will last at least 100 years. The containers on top, probably around 50, 60 years, something like that.
Yeah, but
why should we write it off in 10 years?
For ourselves.
We cannot do that. You have to consider it as a normal real estate building. And if you don't do that, it's difficult.
It doesn't have to be too bad. If there are enough other locations where you can go, then you can move to building.
Yeah,
but
that's the problem. You basically need to demonstrate that you'll be able to find another spot which is relevant and centrally located at the end of the first period, which is impossible. You cannot negotiate a lease period starting from 10 years' time, right?
It feels like this is solvable. When the market is growing, more locations will come, then there's this problem of short lease, no problem.
But that's not what it's a timing issue. I think it will evolve, I think it will get better once the project's out there and you see all the benefits. But right now it's just...
Okay, so if I could get your attention back here in the center. So, why would Norway be a good lab for this, starting with this group here?
Yeah, we merged that question with also how can we make a partnership, a wider partnership. I think there's some consensus here. I think Cohen said that there are tens of thousands of developers on land and only a handful that's looking to the ocean. So it's perfectly fine to form large partnerships. There's not really a need to be competitive in this landscape. It's rather to make the floating landscape competitive to, an alternative to land. But I wish, I pointed at Sean last time. I'm gonna...
I don't know what to say. Well,
okay, I'll take it.
Like a hot potato going on.
With this, we discussed that standardization is probably very important when we are going to develop this. And this will require a lot of innovation, new solutions. And innovation should be based on existing standards, innovating new and feeding to new standards, developing the standards. The Norwegian Road Authority is building a 5-kilometer bridge over Bjørnafjorden, Ferjefri E39, a floating bridge. And we invite 60 people here today to hack in a hackathon, creating new ideas and innovating based on open standards for information sharing. Created by Building Smart and Standards Norway on my side. So in that way, in arenas like that, we can innovate new solutions based on standards.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. How about over here? And it's okay too if we want to meld those two questions together. Why Norway? I'm not going to force anybody. Don't worry.
I'll do it if you need me to.
Okay.
The question was
why Norway? Why would Norway be a good lab for this?
Oh, good lab. Yeah. Well, we have a fairly good communication lines between our industrial players and our education institutions, which is beneficial in a research and development phase. And we have the money to do it. we talked about maybe it shouldn't be produced in Norway because it might be cheaper and more efficient to build it somewhere else. But as a lab setting, we should be fairly decent.
Okay, so potentially developing the use cases, doing some of the design, having the production of whatever the elements are done elsewhere, and then testing here. Okay, anybody else in this particular crew?
I think Chelsea had important points about skills.
Yeah? Go ahead.
Yeah, we think it's important, we think Norway is a perfect spot for this lab because the oil industry that Norway is sort of founded on, together with the fishing industry, is going through this big change, and to keep up like the workforce in Norway. I'm from Stavanger, so I know the crisis very well. And I know what you also can get out of a crisis, like innovation. But I think it's important to have it in Norway to sort of keep up the workforce, to keep up like the competence of the workforce, to keep like the value creation in our region stable and growing.
Okay, wonderful. What was the saying? Crisis is the mother of invention, or something like that. Yeah. Okay. How about over here in the living room? I'm gonna try to get in here without getting too close.
We had a lot of good points. It was the culture, the capabilities we have. Like Norway's been, and this was a lot of points shared by Jan. It's been this laboratory for a long time, and people have it in their DNA. They've grown up on the water. Was that you were thinking, or you were thinking the innovation comment? Okay, and then the other question was, why are companies like Wärtsilä and Equinor spending money and trying activities that are so far from the core? And my comment was, because I was on a project a while back that was involved with this, was in this accelerating rate of change that you see, I can stand away from this.
Yeah, I think it might be you.
This accelerating rate of disruption, the only sustainable competitive advantage is the company's ability to adapt and change and learn. So this is about being at the fringe, being at the edge, and being able to adapt and move quicker than the others. And then the example I gave was you have Kodak and Fujifilm. Both big companies. Kodak spent $1 billion a year on innovation, but they responded differently to digital cameras. And so what Fujifilm did is they took their existing market, photography, and they developed new capabilities in digital cameras. And that's a really painful process for an organization. But they were able to serve their market. They make great cameras today. At the same time, they had a bunch of chemists, and they didn't know what to do with that. They have these capabilities, so they moved those capabilities into things like cosmetics. They're thin film chemists, so they make stuff like photography, printing, high-end printing services. And so by innovating on those two dimensions, they're still around. They've been able to adapt. And so I think Equinor, Wärtsilä, a lot of the big companies here are trying to be at that edge and trying to figure out how can we avoid this scenario of disruption. And one more.
Yeah, but the really important point that you made, and this is true for Equinor and for Norway, is that the way we want to innovate is by building on our capabilities. And I think Norway is a country that's always been in the water, on the water, and has tremendous capabilities in this space, and something really important to offer and contribute to the rest of the world in terms of these kind of ocean solutions. So that's what I think Norway has to do.
How many of you that are sitting here work for a company that's engaged in the oil and gas industry? Okay. How many in the services side of the oil and gas industry? Service companies, rather than Equinor and the.
We've got a guy from Kvana here.
Oh, okay, there we go. Excellent.
Sorry.
No, I think it's so building on that, right? When you think about capabilities, and this is one of the discussions we've been in a lot with Equinor and are working with others like Technip FMC as an example. There's obvious capabilities and there's non-obvious capabilities. It's quite cool to think that I think the number is 7 out of the 10 major innovations that enabled the subsea industry in the oil and gas space happened in Norway. Many of them came from Kongsberg, which isn't even on the sea. right? So places like Kongsberg, Stavanger, and companies like what used to be Kongsberg Maritime and is now, etc., Fartsel, Equinor, etc. Our ability to adapt in the future is obviously contingent on our ability to find both the obvious and the non-obvious capabilities and apply them to new problems that matter to a lot of people. So being creative enough to be able to create the sorts of partnerships that allow us to try. I was doing a project a couple of years ago with a chap from Unilever, and his question was always like, yeah, we can do that, but how's it going to create in-year returns? Like, asking that question kills all potential for innovation at all, right? So how can we create the partnerships and the conversations in this group and in this community that can allow us to do more of the sorts of things that Jason and Kohn showed us on the screen, and can allow us to represent the companies or the communities that we represent, and ultimately be part of the solution when the time comes, because timing is almost everything, and the time will surely come. But if we're not working on positioning ourselves now, we're not going to be part of the party when it happens. So shifting the discussion now before we close, because I think I'm accurate in saying that we are going to have to close here at some point, Margaret. Shifting the conversation then to that topic around how we can start the discussions and the partnerships that allow us to develop the mindset in the company that Margaret and the team's been working on at Equinor inside our own organization, so we can participate when the time is right. Any thoughts on that? How can we do that within our own organizations, but also in between our organizations?
Well, I think one thing that we haven't discussed about in innovation is the competence of innovation. So it's training. How do you do it?
Yeah.
How do you learn it? How do you practice it? And so even in an organization like Equinor, you can have a team, but then you need to have a lot of people behind the team, under and over the team. So I would recommend to go back to not go back to school, but look into how innovation works, is practiced, and techniques that can be used. Design sprints is a good idea. Doing workshops is a great idea. Going back to the basics. One thing that I work with in my research is human-centered mapping. So I take a process and I look at who is doing what along the timeline of this process. So in a design process, I would look at, okay, who decides that this process is going to start, then who is the next person, and who is the next person, and so on. And then I look at, okay, what kind of information do these people have into their hands to make this decision? What do they pass on to the next person so that they can implement the brief and so on? And you can do that in the supply chain when you have different contractors, and then you can see what kind of collaboration people are doing at the moment, and what kind of new collaboration they could do. So that's just one technique.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Pastor Margaret there, thanks.
Yeah, just thinking about your question on partnerships, and again, we did use a design thinking approach in this project in a very deliberate way, and what that encouraged us to do was to open up to partners that Equinor would never normally work with and speak to, and that's been really, fertile ground and definitely something we want to continue to do. But today's discussion has actually made me think about the potential for public-private partnership in this space as well, and that's definitely something I will personally follow up on after this. So thank you for that inspiration.
Wonderful, thank you. Over here. Thank you very much. Please, sir.
In Wärtsilä we have an innovation process, and for us the most important factor is to have anchoring support and money, funding from the top management. That reflects down in the organization, and radical innovation and innovation, even if it's cannibalizing our own business. If it's not supported from the top, you will never get anything. The second important part of this kind of information innovation is to be democratic. Everybody can innovate, but you have to support it and cherish it. So then, if you then have a system that is able to get from all the competent people in big organizations, you will get what you want, but you have to have support.
Thank you. I think that's a very reality-based piece of advice. It's often very tempting to fall in love with the idea, but it's probably very wise to go find somebody in your organization who's really skilled at building that sort of executive or senior leadership buy-in, and sit down and talk tactics. Develop the idea in a bubble if you can get away with it, and I think that's maybe how Highwind started, on the back of that napkin. But in parallel, make sure that you're having a discussion with somebody who can help you figure out how to build sponsorship so that when the time comes you can actually get it somewhere. Anybody else?
To put a different spin on it, so part of CoreMarine, and we're a small sort of specialised team within sort of ocean space. And what we've found in the recent couple of years, actually, when we started, was actually trying to find those corporate partners and saying, you are trying to innovate and develop and digitise, to use the buzzword, but for them to do that within their organisation can sort of take a long time and processes to go through. But partnering up, as we have with a few larger organisations, we've been able to provide them solutions that they can then implement internally, and creating smaller partnerships around with smaller specialised companies. And this ties back to what you're saying about the loss of oil jobs in Norway. That's how we started. We all were left without a job. You have high-skilled engineers and technical people in Norway, particularly, and you have a lot of new small companies coming along that are looking to partner. They're wanting to build their own company as well, but they also want to see you survive and develop and build and innovate. So actually getting those smaller partnerships will allow these larger innovations to actually happen by using the specialist skills that are actually sitting on your doorstep, and taking that back to management, saying, instead of trying to do it in-house, partner up and get that development.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of competence available out there if you are a bit creative in finding it. I've got a couple names down here on these cards with another a view or two that could be interesting to bring in, and I'm playing a bit Russian roulette because I don't know if you're actually here. So I'm going to try this, which is embarrassing, and on the one hand, but Ivan Virik. Okay, we've heard from you a number of times, but you have a commercial property and legal focus. Do you have a view from specifically that side of things that you think could be useful to bring into the discussion?
Sure. I think the major obstacle for floating cities is on the regulatory side. I think commercially it's easy to see that why people would want this. It's interesting, it's fun, it's something new. Build your houses on it. I don't think I don't know anything about engineering at all, but from what I've heard, this is not like the most technically advanced idea. So I don't think that would be the major issue. But what we see when we look at the legal framework, at least in Norway, we don't have zoning laws that on water. So we don't have like the legal framework on a national level. And on a local level, we don't have anything like this at all. We don't have like any political focus on this whatsoever. I've never heard about this from politicians at all. And so what you really need is, I think, is the ability to convince the politicians to put this legal framework into being. And you need some type of company or other major player that has political capital to start to convince the politicians to start to implement this. And I think that's an issue that you don't have with smaller flotation projects. We see from the oil sector, we have a legal framework for that. We have a legal framework for the shipping industry, and we have something in between, like jacks that you put on the water and you can raise them up again and move them somewhere else.
So if you were to pursue that, and building on Margaret's point about the public-private partnership piece in the public sector, who would you want to talk to? Who's a good?
I would want to talk to Equinor.
No,
Just because they've done this before, so that's the obvious collaboration partner.
But in the public sector, not the private sector.
In the public sector.
Yeah.
Like I said, politicians, the guys that make the rules. So like you need some sort of like lobby activity to convince the politicians that this is something that that they want and that the people who elect them want. So I think that would be a way to start.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Cool. Okay. So Margaret, we are now going to actually close. Does anybody have a parting comment or reflection that they'd just like to add before we do that?
I can just a couple of words?
Yeah.
From a wall?
Yeah, of course.
I just want to say thank you to Equinor team and Synteo team and everyone who participated in this wonderful adventure. Even for me, I'm so happy that everything, has been realized and we are now all together here and sharing experience and trying to create an impact, and trying to use our resources and our knowledge, especially in the marine and oil and gas industry, in another way, in another shift. So thank you very much for that. And one special thank you to dear Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay. Appreciate your participation. Would you like to close again, Margaret, or do you feel like you've... I'm sure we're going to talk about this afterwards. It's going to be fun.
How many times can we end a session? Okay, it's for real this time. Thank you all so much for joining. It's wonderful to see so many friends here. Manissa, Annetta, Nikolai, thank you for coming along. And to all my Equinor colleagues who've helped out on the project, thank you to you. And thank you to everyone else. I'm excited. I think there are new possibilities to talk about. I'm gathering that from the discussion today. So you will hear from us again, and we'll bring this community together again. Thank you.